Honoree, General T.Y Danjuma, retired, our very, very dear past honorees, Chief Oluwakin Kugbe, Chief Emeka Anyoku, Professor Anya, distinguished panelists, very, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's truly an honor, a pleasure, and a privilege for very, very many different reasons for me to be here this morning and to be part of what I think will be an extraordinary event, an extraordinary conversation that's going to be at the heart of how we make progress as a society. The greatest fascination of my own time of being is what makes for human progress. And after more than 40-something years of total immersion, literally speaking, in what it is that leads to the progress of a society, elements came together as we were fashioning this event that said to me, this conversation will bring out some very important points for how truly our society can find its gate. Why do we honor people like Chief Oluwakin Kugbe, people like Chief Emeka Anyoku, people like Professor Anya, people like General Theophilus Yakubu Danjuma? It's not because Nigeria needs another honor event. If anything, Nigeria needs far fewer honor events, because each honor exercise I watch on TV makes me sad about what the honor system has become in our country. We honor people not so much for the General Danjumas, but for the young persons who need to learn a thing or two about what it means to lead so that we can build a better society. This is why we honor people. We honor people because they have had social impact. In fact, the essence of being for me is about impact. If your life has not had impact, I'm not sure it's worthwhile that you were born, actually. If your life has not had impact, I'm not really sure that it's worthwhile to have been born. To leave an indelible mark beyond self, the need for self, is, at least for me personally, the essence of being. And I'm not so sure that many of you, if you take a look at our national honors list, will say all these people have had a life that made a difference to the life of others. In fact, many of them took away from the life of others being better lived. But that is part of our experience that we must live to work, to correct, to change. Now, who is CVL that has this audacity to believe that it can recognize people as being exemplars? Well, CVL really came out of experience of this immersion that I've talked about, that has been lifelong in what leads to human progress. And at some point, as an academic, as a manager in industry, as somebody active in civil society, just trying to figure out what the reason is that my Thai classmates can run into me at Charles de Gaulle and say as the first word, Pat, what happened to Nigeria? You guys were the smartest guys in class. And I needed to make effort to construct what makes for human progress. I had the good fortune of working with Jeffrey Sachs on the first Africa Competitiveness Report for the World Economic Forum. And we went to the World Economic Forum to present this report. And the president of Mozambique, I believe, in a very humorous way, took on the experts about what they suggest to do and what African leaders try to do and the outcome that does not bring what the experts suggest it will bring. He was very humorous and people laughed and laughed and laughed. But almost like Peter Nahoro says, you got to laugh to cry. Or is it the other way around? I actually stopped laughing and went back to my room that night and could not sleep. And I kept asking myself the question, what makes for human progress? Before it was done, I had sketched a framework that is called the Growth Drivers Framework, and is a central thesis of my book, Why Nations Are Poor. And amongst these variables were, of course, the one that everybody talked about the most at such kinds of meetings at the World Economic Forum is policy choices that you make. But it was clear to me that many times when Nigeria made the right policy choices, there was a pushback when those policies got implemented because of weak institutions. So institutions were such a critical part of development for me. So it had to be part of that framework. There was the issue of human capital. We can reap a demographic dividend from our huge youth bulge, but we can reap anarchy if we don't invest to translate people from statistics into human capital. There was entrepreneurship, this whole business of creative destruction and how it takes us forward. And very, very central to all of this, there was culture. Because ultimately, to use the title of a colloquium at Harvard a few years ago, values shape human progress. But who sets the tone of culture? Who affects those values? It's clear. Leaders. Leaders shape culture, and culture determines human progress. So how do we build these leaders? And CVL crystallized from that thinking as a platform to develop a generation of leaders who can shape human progress. And so one of the many ways, CVL has a plethora of programs, and some of them I think we can read about in the brochure. But one of the ways that we do it is we look for men who in some aspect of their life have made impact, whether they had a title or not. And indeed, most of them do not even have titles. We can even say of General Danjuma that he's picked up a few titles along the way. Chief of Army Staff, Minister. But it's not about what titles he has had, but about what his life in certain areas have meant for impact. And the particular area that we have chosen to focus on is essentially the area of strategic philanthropy. And our colloquium today will speak to strategic philanthropy. So essentially what we do is use the life of the honoree to affect a generation of people to understand how to live their own lives so that society may make progress. And this is why we focus on the kinds of people that we have celebrated, because we know that it is very easy and is the dominant way in Nigeria to seek power. But there's a difference between power and purpose. Our hope is that in focusing on people who have found purpose, we can make people recognize that the transition from power to purpose is what produces the example of what gives you immortality. People to remember the impact you made long after you are gone. And the whole essence of living is the pursuit of immortality. CVL, in doing this, also pursues other tracks. And I think it's important to make some points about some of the tracks that we pursue. One of the passions of the moment in what we do at CVL is what I like to call our social justice projects, initiatives. One of the big mistakes of modern Nigeria is the way the society has begun to separate between those who have access to resources and those who don't have those resources. When many of us grew up, we went to mission schools or government schools that had children of ministers, that had children of the washerman. They all got first-class education, and they used that education to become whatever they became. Today, some of us send our children to schools where they pay 3 million naira a term in Nigeria. And others pretend to go to school and get no education at all. So we're creating two societies. We will reap what we're sowing if nothing dramatic happens. And as part of that, one of the things CVL has started to do is to build in rural areas schools that are going to be better than Corona for the children of the poor to go to school free of charge. And this is both in regular primary, secondary, and vocational. And we have 2 locations we're working on this: Ikorodu in Lagos and Ibuzo in Delta State. We have worked on the idea of youth centers. One place that will have all these facilities, science, park of sorts, vocational, and schools from around, young people from all over can meet at these youth centers and develop a new sense for the kind of world. We've even developed an approach to teaching, which I refer to as the pedagogy of the determined and the pedagogy of desire. Because part of the problem of our society is that we don't really know what's valuable in life. We look at our neighbor, we see the size of his Mercedes, and we say, mine must be bigger than his. And that becomes what drives us. If we can teach a proper pedagogy of desire, we will build leaders that can transform the world. And part of what we have started doing at CVL is running leadership training programs to offer all cadres of young emerging potential leaders. We're involved in advocacy, and very importantly, events such as this enable us to communicate their sense of why the CVL exists. And so today we'll turn to social philanthropy in honoring a man who has made a remarkable difference to that cause in Nigeria. If you read my remarks there, and Professor Anya was part of the effort that Professor Leslie Obiora made to start strategic philanthropy in Nigeria. There are people with resources all over, but they're leaving those resources to be fought over by people who don't know how they were accumulated when they die. Yet they could use those resources to change the world. And this is what it's about, and this is why we celebrate General Theophilus Yakubu Danjuma. I thank you.